Hi, this week on the Heroes, Villains, and Sidekicks Show, we're going to be doing something a little different. We won't be talking about a character on the show, we'll be talking about an object. An object that comes in many colors, some that kill, some that induce madness, and some that give you 3 eyes and maybe 6 arms. But they all come from the same place, the planet Krypton. That's right, we're going to be looking at the backstory and the history of Kryptonite in all its various colors. And that's what we'll be doing here on the Heroes, Villains, and Sidekicks Show. We'll be learning and talking about origins and backstories of heroes and villains and sidekicks throughout the comic book universe and pop culture. Now, we're going to, of course, look at your more popular characters, but we're also going to look at obscure characters you may have never heard of, but I think you'll really dig. So you can probably tell this episode is a little different. We're not talking about a person, a superhero, a villain, a sidekick. We're actually talking about a thing. So I've been wanting to add a segment at the end of each show, sort of where I do a brief overview of, a gadget, a weapon, an object of power from comics or pop culture. Batman's utility belt, the ultimate nullifier, the Bat utility belt isn't a little thing, but something that just sort of highlights the history of it and sort of what it was there for and what it's used for. And I figured these objects, they're a huge part of the characters, and they've impacted them in stories, either good or bad. So I figured, why not add a small segment to the end of each show where we sort of highlight one of these. So to kick it off, I figured I'd do an entire episode on one of these, objects of power, and it's going to be Kryptonite. But here's the thing. Like a lot of characters that I've talked about on the show, when I do the research on them, I learn so much that I never knew. And Kryptonite is no different. Before we get into it, I want to see if I can get some help from everybody out there. So for this new segment, where we are going to sort of explore the backstory of an object of power. I don't know what to call it. I don't know what to call the segment. Now, I was talking to my wife, and she came up with, and we both came up together, weapons, widgets, and whatnots, which I thought was pretty funny. It's a little bit of a tongue twister there, but that was fairly amusing. But I thought, why not open it up to everybody out there listening and see what you guys can come up with? So go ahead and head over to the episodes page on this site, Heroes, Villains, and Sidekicks.com, and find the post for this episode. It'll be called Kryptonite, and leave a comment on what you would think that this segment should be called at the end of the show. Or, of course, you can also go to the homepage or any of the pages, and there's that little side link, a little side tab where it says, record a message. And now there's actually a record a message on the homepage right up at the top by the podcast player. And you can actually leave me a voice message, and I can play that on the air, and we can use that in the show. So go ahead and try that out. But let's get you guys. Tell me what you think this little segment at the end of the show where I sort of give a little bit of a history and backstory of, Cap's shield or web shooters, something like that, the ultimate nullifier. A little thing like that, not a little thing, that's pretty huge, right? It's the ultimate nullifier. And then we'll go ahead and see how many we get in, maybe put them up for a vote and see which one comes out on top. And one more thing, again, I did mention, of course, you can now leave me a message, a voice message on the site. So right over to the side of the site, there's a tab with a microphone icon on it. It says, what character do you want to hear about? So if you just click on that, it'll pop a button up, and it's a little microphone, and you can record a voice message up to 3 minutes and tell me, what character you want to hear about, maybe why you dig that character. Now, it can be anybody from comics or pop culture, anybody. And I'm really curious to see how this technology works out. I've seen other people use it on different podcasts, and I think it's pretty cool because what I can then do is I can use your message and play it in the podcast. So if you want your message on the show, go ahead and leave your name if you want. You don't have to. But at the end of it, tell me that you want it to be played on the air. Of course, I won't put that part in, but at least it's for me to know you wanted it on the air. So head over to the site. Again, leave a message or a post for what you want this sort of, weapons, whatnots, and widgets section to be called. And of course, leave me a message on who you'd like to hear me highlight on the show. Okay, so let's get into the origin and backstory of Superman's least favorite pet rock. Now, wait, do you remember pet rocks? I mean, they actually had a pet rock Kryptonite. I mean, I'll leave a picture over on the site. But now, Kryptonite actually debuted in the Adventures of Superman radio show way back in 1943 in a story arc titled The Meteor from Krypton. And the cool thing is, of course, with the magic of Google, I found the recording, and I'll put a link to it in the show, and I might put a little piece of it in the episodes just so you can hear what it sounds like. And it's the first time I actually heard a radio show like in detail. I listened to the whole thing, and it was actually pretty fun. And the next time Kryptonite shows up is actually on the serialized television program Adventures of Superman in 1952. And again, this is really interesting because we forget that Superman, also had a life even back then in various types of media. But now, before all of that, before it was first heard on the radio in 43 and in 52 on TV, we have learned more recently that Jerry Siegel, one of the co-creators, of course, of Superman, wrote a story in 1940 that was unpublished, and it was called The K-Metal from Krypton. And of course, it featured a substance from Superman's home that drained him of his powers. But here's something else it did, and this is something that would have changed a lot of stuff in Superman. The whole story is pretty awesome. I actually just read it. I did not know about it until I did the research for this. There's a link over at the site, and you can read this comic, because I'll tell you why in a second. The cool thing that it did, one of the other cool things that this version of Kryptonite did, is it not only drained Superman of his powers, it gave normal humans superpowers. So that would have been way different. Now, why we can actually read this comic now is, Superman, the hugest Superman, hugest, did I just say that? The biggest Superman fan, Mark Waid out there, he actually did some sleuthing, and they had known about this script, and he did some looking in the archives, and he was able to find all these different scripts and the art for all these other stories, and he paired them together until he realized there was one script that didn't go with any art. And he realized that was the script that had been unpublished, no one really knows why, that talked about Kryptonite. So he retyped it all, and him and some other comic professionals recreated or created the comic, and it's out there online. It's like a web comic that you can look at. And again, I put the link to it right on the episodes page for this site. It's really fun, and it changes a lot. I mean, if it had ever really been published, I don't know how they would have come back from it. It changes that much. So head over to the site and click on that link, and you can read the, what was it called again? The K-Metal from Krypton. But what is Kryptonite? I mean, it's pretty simple. It's a piece of Superman's homeworld, Krypton. The pieces from his exploded planet traveled through space all the way, from Krypton over to here, his new home Earth, and landed. Now, and it's kind of sad when you think about it. I mean, he's alone here on Earth. He really doesn't have a home. But these pieces of his planet are all around Earth, and all they'll do is kill him. I mean, it'd be nice, if he could just... I mean, how many of us go out on we go on a trip or whatnot, and we see a small stone, and we pick it up as a sort of a keepsake, and we keep it in our pocket? I mean, it would kind of be, maybe it's just the nostalgic, sentimental in me. It'd be nice if I could, Clark could maybe have a little stone on a keychain from his home planet. Of course, he couldn't, because it would kill him. But it would be nice. I think that'd be a nice little thing for him to be able to do. So they might have to develop some type of kryptonite that allows him to do it. Because as we go into the show, you're going to learn there are very, very many types of kryptonite. So maybe there can be sort of like a nostalgic kryptonite that allows him to carry in his pocket, and when he touches it, think good thoughts of Krypton. But there isn't, unfortunately, a nostalgic kryptonite. There's just the bad kinds of kryptonite. So let's take a look at the one we know the most, So this little green rock, kryptonite, what it does is it gives off radiation. That's the one we're most familiar with, the green version, that disrupts and destroys Kryptonian cells. It sort of drives out the solar radiation that empowers Superman or other Kryptonians and sort of fills it with this deadly radiation and can eventually kill them. And since it does emit a radiation, it can also be harmful, the green kryptonite, to humans. And we sort of learned that back in the 90s when sort of the evil business corporate Lex Luthor used to wear a ring with kryptonite as the jewel to sort of ward away Superman so he couldn't harm him. And in time, what happens is that kryptonite, the radiation from it, gives him sort of like bone cancer or cancer in his hand, and he actually has to have it removed. So over time, kryptonite, because it sort of gives off radiation and our bodies do not like radiation, it can actually harm humans. And when I'm talking about kryptonite on this episode, it's not, I wouldn't say a touchy subject, but kryptonite has changed over time, whether it's in crisis, post-crisis, New 52, and even now, different versions come and go. Some of the more popular ones, like green, that'll always be there. Some of the more obscure ones we talk about later, we probably will never see again. But let's go ahead and keep going on. And what is all this kryptonite stuff about? So now, again, the first mention of Krypton was in the radio serial, but it made its first appearance in comics way back in Superman number 61 in 1949. And whenever I read something like this, I am always I'm just amazed. I mean, that is almost 70 years ago. That this character and all the stories around him survived that long, and we're still, creating stories and reading them today. It's just incredible. And one of the coolest things is that, about Superman, I mean, I've never really read a lot of Superman. I did from time to time, but speaking of this history of this character that is so just ubiquitous in our society, the neatest thing about it is, I think, that you can go to and visit where it all started. So you can go to Cleveland, which is where Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster lived. You can go there. You can go to their houses, and you can sort of walk right up to them and look. It's kind of geeky, right? You can walk up and just stare at their houses. One has kind of got this neat little fence going around it, and you can say, like, up in that window, they created Superman. And I went to visit a friend in Cleveland, and I got to go there, and it was really neat. It was really neat to see where this happened. And I'll dig them out, and I'll actually post some of the photos from there so you can see what his house, what their houses look like. One thing that really surprised me when reading Superman 61 was that kryptonite started off not as green, but red. I mean, that totally surprised me. I mean, one thing we all think of, kryptonite is green, but no, it started out red. The first time we see kryptonite, it's a small red gem on the turban of a phony Swami. So Lois has visited the Swami to do a little expose piece and debunk him. Now, in the process, he notices that she's Lois Lane and realizes what she's there to do, to expose him. And he grabs her and threatens her, and she yells for Superman. So Superman shows up, and the Swami panics, and he says he starts believing his own hype, and he says he's gonna put a hex on Superman, and he starts wiggling his fingers at him. And at that moment, Superman looks stunned and exclaims that he feels drained of all strength and weak. So when Superman tries to punch the Swami, he almost falls over, and the bad guy gets away. So the Swami, of course, is thinking he has magical powers. Superman is not so sure. So what he does is, Superman, he doesn't believe it's magic, but he needs to understand what's happening. So he plays a little bit of Batman and goes and does some detective work. Now the trail leads him to a jeweler that sold the Swami the little jewel, the piece of kryptonite. The jeweler then tells Superman that he got the gem from a miner named Harry Peters. So Superman flies off to the miner, and Harry tells him that he doesn't believe that the stones are from Earth. He believes that they are actually meteorites. And now this is where the story gets all golden age. So Superman decides he's going to track down where these meteorites came from by following their path and traveling, I'm going to make sure I get this right, and traveling the speed of light to go backwards through time, following them, to follow the path of the meteor all the way back to the origin. So he flies faster than the speed of light, and is starting to go through time, and he actually sees the meteor and he follows it back all the way to its point of origin. Again, very golden age, very wacky that Superman had these types of abilities. So faster and faster he travels until he breaks the time barrier, following the meteorite all the way back to its place of origin, the planet Krypton. Now, he then lands on the planet, and he can't be seen because, as the comic puts it, he is not of their time. He sort of looks like a ghost. He's all white. He's not colored in. And he's not just sort of seeing this in a memory or a vision. He is really there. He is back in time. He is on the planet Krypton. And he then sees someone walking, quite purposefully through the street that he looks a lot like. And yes, guess what? It is Jor-El. It's his dad. He doesn't know it, but it is his father. Now, he sees Jor-El and his wife put their infant son into a rocket and escape their dying world. Now, you probably heard this before, but get this. Superman knows nothing about this. This is really one of the coolest things about this issue. Superman follows the infant's rocket to witness the fate of the child. Now, of course, we know the rocket crashes on Earth, and Superman then sees his parents, the Kents, take the child from the rocket. It's then he suddenly realizes the truth of it. Clark now knows why he is different, and why he can do the things he can do. And I'll quote this part. So at last, after all these years, Superman is at last aware of his birthplace and why he is the strongest man on Earth. So, that is so wild. I had never known that Clark didn't even know where he came from, that he was, he was a Kryptonian, that he was an alien until Superman issue number 61. So it's not only the first time that we are introduced to Kryptonite, but it's the first time that Superman is actually introduced to who he is and where he's from. So now, back on Earth and back in his own time, Superman knows what's going on. He knows that it's not magical powers, that it's the stone. And when he confronts the fake Swami, he, from a distance, sort of uses his super breath and blows the turban off of the Swami. He then goes back to the jeweler. He purchases the Kryptonite. And it's a bit of subterfuge here. He has as Superman, which makes no sense, he tells the jeweler to deliver the stone to a Mr. Smith. The courier actually delivers it to Mr. Smith, and then we see that Mr. Smith is really Superman in disguise, which is all kind of strange. Again, golden age. And then Superman then sinks the Kryptonite in the middle of the ocean, staring out, wondering if there are any more fragments of his home life or his home planet that are out there that can come back to harm him. Now, that's the beginning. That's the first time we see Kryptonite in comics. And it has gone through many different changes over time due to different events, as I mentioned, through the years, whether it be pre-crisis or post-crisis. Although it pretty much does the same thing for the most part, Kryptonite-wise, there have been some changes and updates in the color and effects Kryptonite has on Kryptonians and humans. So let's go over the different types of Kryptonite out there. Now, some of these are part of canon, which means, they are, you will see them in storylines and they are part of the mythos of the character. And some have only appeared in satires or even Elseworld stories. And some are actually only from TVs and movies. Now, for the most part, the big main ones you will still see in canon, but some of the ones we're going to talk about, they are from the Golden Age, and they will probably only ever stay there, although it would be neat to see some of them now just because they do so many wacky things. So I'm not going to go over all of them because there are a lot, but let's go ahead and start with the basics and then move on to some of the cooler, funnier, more obscure variations. Okay, we have green Kryptonite, and we've covered this one. It weakens and potentially kills a Kryptonian. Then we have red Kryptonite, and this first appeared in Adventure Comics number 252 back in 1958. Again, these dates, so long ago. And it originally weakened Superman, but in later years, it actually has an effect now that causes behavioral issues, whether it's sort of losing their inhibitions or just becoming downright evil. Then we have blue kryptonite, and this is an imperfect version of green kryptonite, and it actually debuted in Superman 140 and affects bizarro Supermans, bizarro creatures. And again, back in the Golden Age, it can sometimes also reverse the effects of red kryptonite. Then we have gold kryptonite, and this is when kryptonite is exposed to atomic radiation, and it changes its molecular structure, and of course it turns it, as it's called, gold kryptonite. And it debuted in Action Comics number 299, and it took away a Kryptonian powers permanently. Now, in post-crisis, when it did show up, the loss of power was only temporary. Now, there's white kryptonite, which debuted in Action Comics 279, which kills all plant life. That's a strange one. Not the strangest, but that is a fairly specific and odd type of kryptonite. Then we have one of my favorites, which is orange kryptonite. And this is where we start getting into the weirder stuff. Orange kryptonite gives super abilities to any animals that it comes in contact with. And it debuted back in Action Comics number 261, back in the 60s, when Supergirl's cat Streaky came in contact with it and gets superpowers. And you might have seen Streaky even more recently in the Crypto comic, which is just a fantastic all-age sort of kids, and I enjoyed it when I watched it with my son, comic. Crypto, I don't think it's on anymore, obviously, but even in reruns, I've never really seen it, but I'm sure you can find the DVDs out there. Then we have black kryptonite, and this actually splits Kryptonians into two separate entities, one good, one evil. And this first debuted in the Supergirl series from 2005 in issue number 2, when Lex Luthor, when he was wearing the big green battle suit, had a gauntlet with different types of kryptonite in it, and he decided to see what the black one did, and he used it on Supergirl. And that was a big mistake, because you don't want an evil, all bad Kryptonian, because they will rip your head off. I mean, they didn't do that to him, but they could. Then we have jewel kryptonite, and it looks like that. It's like a very clear, so almost like a diamond, and it debuted in Action Comics number 310 in 1964. And what it does is increase the psychic abilities of Kryptonians in that story that were trapped in the Phantom Zone, and it allows them to really produce very vivid illusions that look almost like hallucinations to who they're affecting. Then we get even a little bit stranger, a little bit more of a blend. They decided, let's mix some of these things up. There was a red-green kryptonite, and this was created by Brainiac and debuted in Action Comics number 275 back in 1961. And what it can do is it can mutate a Kryptonian. So like in that storyline, he used it, and I believe Superman, I want to say, gained a third eye maybe in the back of his head. I remember reading that story a ways back, but it mutates Kryptonians. That was a really funny one. Now, this is probably the strangest one of all. Pink kryptonite. And again, this is one we will probably never see again, but it was in just one panel of a satire issue that was poking fun at Silver Age comics and Silver Age kryptonite. And believe it or not, you may have probably guessed where I'm going with this. Pink kryptonite turned Superman gay. Now, this was just a satire story, and again, it was poking fun at all the weird types and forms of kryptonite in the Silver Age, but there is a very amusing panel where Superman is definitely putting the moves on Jimmy Olsen, who is looking fairly confused. Now, again, you were never probably going to see this again, but that issue where they're doing this, the satire on these weird versions of kryptonite, is very, very funny. If you get a chance to take a look at that one, definitely pick it up. Now, there are at least a dozen more types of kryptonite out there, and I'll be adding the remainders to the site so you can read through them. Because, like I said, I could be going on for another 20 minutes just on the different types of kryptonites. The key thing you'll need to know is that you are more than likely never going to see many of these types of kryptonite out there in the DC universe. After Crisis, a lot of kryptonites were erased from canon, never to be seen again, but some do pop up. For instance, red kryptonite just appeared in the first season of Supergirl on the CW. making her lose her inhibitions and sort of go all evil. Now, I say just appeared because we're just getting to watching that, and I actually just watched it the other day with the family. It was a fun episode. And actually, one of the neatest parts of that episode of Supergirl was when Kara was affected by the Red K, and she went to a bar, and she was flicking peanuts, and they were smashing the bottles in front of her. And what was neat about this is it was a direct nod to the Superman 3, where Christopher Reeves was affected by synthetic kryptonite that Richard Pryor made with Robert Vaughn, and it turned him evil. So he did the same thing. He was sitting at the bar. I'll put some photos up to it. It was really the only good scene from the entire movie. I remember when I was a kid thinking Superman 3 was awesome because I loved Richard Pryor, and I thought it was funny. Looking back, of course, it is not the best Superman movie out there. Is it better than 4? Yes, definitely. Is it better than 2? No way. Not at all. But if you get a second, watch at least that scene. I'm sure it's out there on YouTube. Maybe I'll even try to find a link and put it on the site. So the different types of kryptonite do pop up from time to time. But let's be honest, I have to say, I don't think we will ever see pink kryptonite in any storyline anytime soon. So next week on the show, I'm working on securing an interview that from a writer who had a big impact on how a character's origin was revamped and retconned. And it's one of my favorite characters, and he's one of my favorite authors. I'm not going to say anything right now. More on that later. We'll see if I can make it happen. But at the end of that episode, and hopefully every episode from then on, I will be, of course, having this little segment where I talk about an object or weapon or thingy, in some detail, and we will learn about the history of it. Now, it probably won't be as in-depth as Kryptonite, because this is an entire show just on Kryptonite. But this little segment will be something that will give us the true history of this. Like, who would have known that Kryptonite started out red? So we'll find a little bit of that history, that original history of an object, and we'll talk about it on the show. So remember to just head over to the site and post a comment in this post for this episode on what you think that segment should be called, or better yet, leave a voice message, remember, by clicking on the little mic on the homepage. Well, I want to thank you all for listening to this week's show. You can head over to the site, heroesvillainsandsidekicks.com, to check out the post for this episode on the episodes page and see some of all the crazy photos and pages from the different comics of how Kryptonite affected Superman and others. There's some really fun stuff over there. There's also the link to that newly published Jerry Siegel comic. It's pretty amazing. And of course, I'll be putting some other stuff up there, including photos of me over at the Joe Shuster and Jerry Siegel's house. And again, if you're out there listening, please stop over to iTunes and subscribe and leave a message. Those will help us move up the rankings and have other people learn about the show. And lastly, if you have any idea of characters that you'd like to hear on the show, go over to the website and click on the link to leave a message, or you can post it on the comments area, or of course you can go over to our Facebook page and leave it over there. I want to thank everyone out there for listening and for your support on the show. We'll be back next week with more. Take care.